The Three Rebellions trilogy began, I suppose, in 2004 when I was still teaching in a secondary school, and during a lesson on Chartism, one of the students asked, possibly to get me away from the subject, what was the impact of Chartism globally? And I really had no answer to that question. It wasn't something that had particularly been an issue in the work that I'd done previously. But it made me think, and as a result of that, I started work on the first in the trilogy, the Three Rebellions, which looked at the Canadian rebellions of 1837 and 1838, the Newport Rising, the major Chartist rebellion of 1839, and the Eureka Stockade rebellion in Victoria, Australia at the end of 1854. The thing that actually linked these three rebellions, other than the fact that they all occurred within a colonial context, was the fact that they essentially involved working people, farmers, farm labourers, gold diggers, iron and coal workers, in a concerted attack on what they saw as being unthinking and essentially deaf government that was paying no attention to their requests, demands for political reform. Once I was working on Three Rebellions, it was really then that I decided to convert what essentially was one book into the trilogy. The second volume, Famine, Fenians and Freedom, 1840 to 1882, focuses upon the Irish dimension within the British Empire, and in particular the ways in which the Irish diaspora, both before and after the famine in the 1840s, actually led to demands for political reform within Ireland, and how those reforms were viewed by people in America, Canada and Australia, as well as in Ireland itself and on the British mainland. What we have, I think, in that particular book is an examination of a debate between those who wanted to remain within the Union as established in 1801, those who wanted a more devolved form of government within the Union, or as a first step towards separation and independence. The third volume is a much broader examination of rebellion. It covers the period from 1600 to 1980 and is essentially called Resistance and Rebellion within the British Empire. What it does is to look at the ways in which those, to some extent at the margins of colonial society, sought to bring their grievances to the colonial authorities, or to resist and in some cases rebel against those authorities. So there is an examination of how indigenous peoples in Virginia, when it was a colony in the late 17th century, Australia, in terms of Aboriginal resistance in the first half of the 19th century, and Maori resistance in New Zealand from the 1840s played out. There's also an examination of the role of convict labour in Australia, but also in areas not really examined in any great detail, particularly in Malaya and in the Andaman Islands. Indentured labour, which essentially replaced slave labour once it was abolished in the British Empire from 1834, is an examination of the way in which large numbers of people, particularly from India and China, were moved willingly, although there are some questions about just how much they knew about where they were going, moved from their homelands to colonies in the West Indies, in the Pacific, and in southern Africa, to provide the labour necessary for the colonial economies to expand once slavery had ceased to be the main source of colonial labour. Slavery itself is considered, in particular the ways in which there was resistance in Jamaica, and a resistance that continued beyond the abolition of slavery, and the book considers in some detail the Morant Bay Rebellion of 1865. The book then, or the second half of the book, essentially looks at some thematic issues in terms of resistance and rebellion. Tax rebellion, focusing on the United States and the events leading up to the War of Independence, but also considering the impact, for example, of taxes in Sierra Leone and South Africa. Millenarianism is also an important factor in rebellion and resistance. The belief that there is a better world to come, and that rebellion was one way of achieving this. This is considered in relation to, again, Southern Africa and New Zealand. Nationalism as a force for political change is also considered, not simply in terms of the colonial peoples who sought independence from British rule, but also white settlers who saw themselves as resisting the moves towards independence in southern Rhodesia. The final rebellion that is considered, if that is actually what it was, is the Rum Rebellion in New South Wales in early 1808. Not really a rebellion, more a coup d'etat, a very English rebellion in many respects, where some sections within the colonial establishment remove William Bligh, the governor, for tyranny, essentially, a position made easier by his previous experience as captain of the Bounty where he suffered a major rebellion, a mutiny in 1790. And the book ends with a consideration of the whole notion of resistance and rebellion within the British Empire, and tries to put forward some ideas, model for future consideration of these issues. So there you have the 3 books within the trilogy. In terms of how long they took to write, I suppose I started writing the first 3 rebellions in 2005 and completed the resistance and rebellion in the British Empire in early 2010. So the 3 books have taken 4 years to write, but considerably longer in some senses to research, and I hope you enjoy them.